Okay, good morning. My name is Shantae Russell. I'm Vice President of Membership at AFC International, and I'm excited to welcome you to today's panel, Emerging Leaders, Disruptive by Design, How to Integrate Proactive Security into a Cyber Resilient Architecture. For those who may not know, AFCIA's emerging leaders are made up of our members who are aged 40 and under. I want to stress, though, that our panelists that are here with us today are not here solely because of their age, yet they're here because of their expertise and experience in their fields. They just also happen to be 40 and under. We appreciate your time and support for our panelists today. You're in for a great session, as our emerging leaders always have great perspective on IT, AI, and cyber. To start, I'd like to introduce you to our moderator, Andy Sauer. Andy Sauer is the CEO and co-founder of Sentinel Blue. His specialty focuses on zero trust, cloud security, scaling regulatory and technical compliance requirements for defense organizations, and aligning operational security to business and executive objectives. Prior to founding Sentinel Blue, Andy worked in the defense industry, running cybersecurity operations, and is a CMMC certified assessor. He is a strong advocate for the cyber workforce development, a proponent of elevating women in leadership positions in cybersecurity, and a supporter of a charitable organization, the Cyber Guild. Andy spends downtime with his wife and boys and volunteers as a paramedic in his local community. And Andy will introduce our panelists and moderate the discussion, so please join me in a warm AFCIA welcome for Andy Sauer.
Hello. I can hear myself. Hey, AFCIA, thanks for having us out here to AFCIA West. It's very nice from an East Coaster in the DC area to escape cold, freezing winter for what was so far a very cold, wet San Diego trip for me so far. So I'm glad the sun is out, but the last couple of days, colder than I expected, and I did not pack appropriately. I brought t-shirts and shorts. You think Southern California, you think like sunshine and everything, but I guess January here is as cold as anywhere else. We have a lot to talk about today. That's important, and I think we're on the fitting stage when we talk about maintaining our competitive edge in an increasingly adversarial world. Some news came out in the last couple of days. Yesterday was big news. I'm sure most everyone here heard about it, coming out of China with DeepSeek AI. Made some big waves, primarily in the Wall Street world, but should register on everyone's minds here when we talk about our competitive edge against our foreign adversaries. Looking at what China's capabilities are, not just in AI, but in other emerging tech, should put us all a bit in a state of concern. It's not they're a boogeyman necessarily. They have real capability. They are a real threat. And there are areas where either they're gaining significantly on us or may truly be in the lead with certain emerging technologies, which if you all care, as I do, as this panel does, about America maintaining its position of leadership and influence in the world, and we want to see our values propagated, and we want to see our influence dominant, this should have us all kind of concerned. Among the tools in our toolbox for enabling and protecting that edge that we need to is our security infrastructure, our critical infrastructure, and enabling it to be resilient against these more and more capable adversarial threats who are able to impact our critical infrastructure, as we've seen. One of the tools in the toolbox is system security engineering. And we're going to talk about that today on this panel. I have a great panel of folks to talk about this with. Hopefully you all see we're an engaging panel and that we want to talk to you all. We have a number of things we're going to talk about, but I encourage, if you have a question, please join us at the mic. There will be time at the end to ask your questions to this awesome panel that you have. And with that, here is your panel. First up, we got Dr. Robert Morgan. Robert's a professional with over 15 years of experience in software engineering. He's a U.S. Navy veteran. He has a doctorate in cybersecurity information assurance and specializes in automation, risk management, incident response, and development. Robert. Then we have Dr. Casey Cleaver. She's an accomplished program management professional with over a decade of experience leading high-value technical initiatives across defense, technology, and education sector. And then we have Jonathan Villalobos. Jonathan has over 15 years of experience with the Navy C4ISR and related fields. He's a seasoned manager, technology insertion pioneer, and has come off some recent successes with the Navy's Big Data Joint Solution. Panel. All right. Thank you all. So I want to jump right in. We're talking about strategies for protecting our infrastructure, building more resilient infrastructure. And as I mentioned, one of the key components is system security engineering as a way of addressing threats in the cyber domain. Panel, can you start by talking about system security engineering, what that is, what these principles are, and what they're meant to do?
Good morning, everyone. So, from my perspective, I'm coming from more of the insurance world, and systems security engineering systems. That's right. Yep. I just call it hardening the system. Is essentially you are just ensuring that all the gaps you're covering all your gaps. There's no space per se where there's anything that can seep through. So that may include passwords, as simple as passwords, MFA, ensuring that you do your patching and so on and so forth. So it's we look at it from the insurance perspective as just common sense. So just kind of making sure you're taken care of from all angles.
Yeah, hey, Robert. I just want to add on to that.
Can you guys hear him?
You guys hear me? Can you guys hear me? Mike?
Hey, Casey, can you slide your mic over for a sec, maybe, until we get a working one, or y'all can share? Do we have a hand mic, maybe? Cool.
All right. Can you hear me now? All right. So, hey, everyone. So, a lot of this goes back to your system of integration. So, when you incorporate a DevSecOps pipeline, nope. How's it? Mic check.
There we go.
A little bit louder?
Cool.
Okay. Yeah, okay, cool. All right, so when you incorporate a systems engineering approach to model-based systems engineering or DevSecOps, a lot of it goes back to that NIST standard 800-160, and it's not necessarily a blueprint there or an instruction guide there. It's really meant to be an approach. Use it as a la carte for your own application. Use it for how you need it and how you can integrate it. We have a very diverse economy in terms of different organizations, different groups, different levels of technology, from enterprise, tactical edge, and the overall from the DoD CIO to the Dawn CIO's approach is that we need to come together on these system engineering approaches and do a more common collaborative practice. So I really appreciate Robert's idea when it says, hey, we're talking about identity or zero trust implementation. It's actually a collective strategy. We need to start approaching this from the tactical edge to enterprise services.
Yeah, so JV, I know when I already did, I called you JV, but when we were talking in prep for our panel, we were talking about the principles of system security engineering, which can lend itself to feeling very technical. Most of our conversation ended up being very cultural, right? And just the mindset shift. Can you speak to the mindset shift, what might be different in traditional model to SSE sort of principles?
Yeah, so a lot of groups and organizations will do it from the cradle to grave approach, right? They'll build it up from the ground up, and they'll make the data useful for their operational need. But then when you start, let's say a red line, right? A red line change that you're going to deploy, it's going to interact field it into a carrier, a ship, and you find out later your attack surface is compromised because it affects the ship's rudder on its own network. These are the cultural changes that we've come along to say, hey, look, I want to make an update and change, and you find out it's not easy to maintain. So the culture through model-based system engineering approaches have been something hard of a lift. Now we're talking about, well, you got an instance, they're not compatible, they're not common or collaborative, and so we've taken this approach to say, hey, look, how can we provide a full-scale enterprise service capability or a tactical edge component that's connected in a disconnected state or a fully micro-segmented state all the way to the orchestration to the cloud, capturing that data, leaving it where it's at. It's a whole cultural shift. We don't want to take all the information in. There's a concept of garbage in, garbage out. And that culturally has affected a lot of people to say, I've gotten PTSD and gotten burnt out from doing a lot of system engineering work to develop something for your visualization for warfighting that's a false positive. And this has changed the way we approach things now because culturally we're saying, hey, stop, pump your brakes. We don't need your The new vendor approach now is I don't want to be only as good as I can ingest my data into your solution, in your platform of a service. I want you to integrate into our system and actually develop something on an OSI model. You got the system application. I want to get down to the data. I want to have security at the data layer. I don't want you to harden and container your system where, thank you, you trapped us with our adversary inside our own box. That's a cultural change in itself. So when we start doing system engineering approaches, we got to meet up on a more common collaborative approach.
To the rest of the panel, something that comes to mind for me when we talk about system security engineering and this change of approach. Traditionally, I feel like we've been fairly reactive, and security is often something of a bolt-on toward the end of a process. And a lot of what we've been talking about is earlier full lifecycle integration of having security at the beginning. Could you guys speak to that and that change of culture, that shift, whether it's technical or at the program level, how things need to change or are changing as we look to integrate security much earlier on in our decision making?
Yeah, I'll start with that. So we can talk about security and getting the security work done, but ultimately we have to make sure that we have the proper conditions to be able to have the right engineers, have the right professionals on board to be able to do this work. So I've done a lot of work with Special Operations Command, building a CI/CD pipeline going into the platform. We're a greenfield effort, and being a greenfield effort, we have to develop within the pillars of Zero Trust. So as I'm building this team, really have to kind of step back and look and make sure that we have the right people in the room to do this work. So that looks at our hiring procedures, our hiring strategy. I can tell you I have interviewed over 100 people for the cybersecurity positions that we've had. We've screened so many. We've got a lot of folks who are in the cybersecurity field, but they're more policy versus hands-on, right? So when we're developing our hiring strategy to get this work done, to develop within the systems engineering cybersecurity framework, we were really looking for, yes, we have an RMF engineer. We have somebody who has policy on lock. But what we also have is we have cybersecurity engineers. So we have folks who can actually harden the containers. They can do the scanning. They can do the work to make sure the environment does operate within those STIG requirements. We also have DevSecOps engineers, software engineers, and platform engineers. So really looking at the amount of people and the talent that you have to get the work done is super important. Now, a really good way to make sure that you have those correct people is thinking about what your contract vehicle is. There's a lot of traditional contracting approaches, very fixed approach, but what we've found has been working really well over at SOCOM where we work. We have an OTA, Other Transaction Authority, and that's more of an agreement. So as the mission changes, as the security requirements changes, as we get additional adversaries or threats, we're able to build and change our approach very easily since we're more agile in our contracting strategy. And that has allowed us to adapt and meet the needs of the mission. So that's kind of looking at our traditional approach to contracting versus the different way to do an OTA or other more flexible contracting vehicles, and also making sure that you're bringing in the different people other than just policy folks.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on this one real quick. So I love the idea between contract vehicles and collaboration. I have an existing effort, let's say with Space Force and C4I. System commands. We're talking about identity federation, access and availability. But I also wanted to talk about, let's say, your platforms, like your DevSecOps platform. Platform 1, OSA. Let's talk continuous ATOs, RAISE compliant. Reciprocity is a big one. There's a speed to partnerships there. So when we actually say, hey, great, you proved it out in Platform 1, I want to go after Zero Trust assessments and accredit that platform all the way across to a Navy OSA DevSecOps pipeline and actually push it out to another ATO process. And we've done that. We've partnered with the Zero Trust Portfolio Office. We have Zero Trust funding to do that assessment. We have collaboration across the organizations looking at DevSecOps pipelines to say, hey, it's not a one or done thing. How can we do a seamless, from a vendor perspective, your orchestration of system engineering, even from the point of uploading your version control, your latest version into that platform, all the way to sharing it, federating it across another platform for DevSecOps. and then driving it through an operational deployment strategy. I mean, these are the kind of cultures that change between vendor approaches to the agencies themselves, where it's usually vendor lock, it's a siloed contract vehicle, and one of the biggest contract vehicles is called ESI. It's an enterprise license where all agencies can actually share and piggyback on that contract vehicle, getting the benefits of discounts, sharing knowledge, SKUs, and cleanse to get after operational use. And the value there feeds a lot of lessons learned that doesn't get lost. Tribal knowledge. If you look at it from JFQ Doden to the Navy, they're going to say, Navy, you're moving along faster than we are, but we want to be a part of that. So we're going to share that contract vehicle with them, and they can get on it when they're ready.
So on, excuse me, on the principles of system security engineering, one of the things we talked about, Robert, was data, right? And the sort of like data focus, but also you mentioned something about assurance, about analytics and assurance and building an assurance understanding to make sure things were actually happening as they were supposed to, as one of the core principles. Can you speak to that?
Yes. So I haven't worked as in depth in from a Navy perspective as my other two colleagues up here, but I work more from the insurance perspective. So for us, we track data as it comes into the system from for wherever it's coming in from. We track it, we tag it, and we kind of monitor it as it goes along. So if it's in whatever repository it's in, we need to know from the PCI DSS perspective, we want to make sure that we're not violating any policies. Of course, the data is secure no matter where it goes. And also ensuring that whenever we manipulate it or whatever we're doing, we're tracking why we're manipulating it, how we're manipulating it. And even in the data transfer, we're encrypting and decrypting, tracking our keys and all that. So everything from the inception of the data to when the data is disposed, from our perspective, we have to track it, we monitor it, and we ensure that, no matter what, we know where it is. Are there instances where there are mishaps with where the data goes? Absolutely. And so that also ties into reporting. Okay, how did this mishap occur? Why did it occur, and how did we mitigate? So we, from the insurance perspective, and we do some DoD contracts, but not as in depth right now. But I can only speak as far as insurance. We track it in on all levels, in all aspects.
So system security engineering, some of these principles just kind of hit on. If I could summarize, what I get is like a mindset change where we have to be more proactive, less reactive, shift things to the left in the life cycle, earlier integration of security, just in terms of the conversation. Then you can get into all the technical stuff of what contract vehicles and how to get into it. What are some of the practical examples we could talk through of these principles being put into effect? The one that comes to mind immediately, JV, is you brought up something about a Navy's ship's rudder and how that had to be approached.
Yeah, so there's a lot going in here when it comes to your system engineering approach to proactive versus reactive. A lot of patching compliance, pushing the latest upgrade, and there's actual model efforts that go towards creating the simulation or digital twin instance of your ecosystem and creating those scenario playbooks, right? The scenario playbooks that echo out the activity of, I'm going to introduce something into the ship, but now it's going to impact and then create a new attack vector that I'm going to be compromising a much bigger mission. And this is the type of things that we need to be creating more seamlessly into our model-based system engineering approaches to, like, let's say, connecting it to a DevSecOps pipeline. So when you start going your application, I'm going to push it out for these users. Part of that checkpoint is going to be its rated score on impact levels. A good example of operational need and delivering capabilities would be the Sailor Edge and Afloat to the C2 solution started with the CVN 72. That approach was a problem statement of sailors needing commercial internet activity, connectivity, and they were going to find means elsewhere to do that. And they didn't have a common structure in play, especially in a disconnected state, to have ships wireless. And we're just talking about CNO, quality of life, quality of work stuff, right? And we're talking about that level of work. But the impact that it makes on a system engineering, when you start increasing your attack surface, hey, I'm just doing this. Unfortunately, you're also introducing a gateway for the adversary to now be on your ship. So C2 was created, started with Catnip. It brought Starlink integration onto the ship. It integrated flank speed, hyperconverged infrastructure on the edge of the ship, deploy federated access services back to the cloud. And now the command and control systems there in play with the security backend gave us an opportunity to work closer with the warfighter, the combat systems officers, and empower them even more so with local control. So if you give up your Wi-Fi access here, you still have your privacy. On that environment, you don't. You sign away your privacy. If you're not patch compliant on your phone, it's going to shut you off. You know, that kind of access and control operation. Because we need to seriously empower our warfighters to do things. These became the lessons learned into the system engineering approach of how we get the voice of the warfighter. There's a lot of actual leadership discussions on a roadmap and vision, the information superiority vision, the Navy service blueprint. Those strategies are things that we're talking about that gets us after addressing Pinnacle 27. These are the approaches where it takes the mindfulness of, hey, get your little R, your user requirements from the warfighter. Incorporate that into, and I think we should talk about at some point, agile release trains or agile approaches to get into the more, how are we going to get past the reporting, testing structure? How do we get faster and deliver faster? I think that's a lot of the leadership's approach, a lot of coming down approaches for us to get to system engineering first, security first, which is the emphasis of that 800-160.
Casey, from your perspective, so when we talk about the practical implementation of some of these things, what are you seeing at the program level? Like, what's working to get this shift to happen?
Excellent question. Thank you. So for me and my team, it's really looking at the architecture of our team, right? You know, building teams, I look and I have my team broken down into a DevSecOps portion, a data portion, and a security portion. So looking at that, we are fortunate in this event that we have started with the security focus first. So we're going out into this, speaking of, scaled agile, right? So we have scaled agile that we produce work under. We just last week finished out our PI planning event. We pulled in the stakeholders to get them in the room to talk about what their requirements were, but also we had our security professionals there to kind of put that lens on the requirements, because security is not first in everybody's mind. So making sure you have the right stakeholders in the room, you have the planning events scheduled and they happen so people can have those conversations. There's sidebars, there's lots of ways to do like hybrid and remote things, but we were all together in the room at SoftWorks in Tampa, Florida, which is right outside of SOCOM area. And we had those conversations and we have our work planned out for the next program increment, and they are all going through the different security checks and gates. We're working on our ATO process, but thinking about outside of, hey, this team is coming in and we're already set to be putting security focus in mind. If you have an established team and this is a shift for you, really look at your team and remember that it's not human nature for someone to walk in the room and say, hey, we're doing this now. That's not how change management works. So I would really step back, look at your team, look at your requirements, and see how you can break it down into like a change management model. I'm a fan of Lewin's change management model. Unfreeze, you kind of talk about why it's important to change. You do a little bit of change at the time, and then you refreeze it, and you kind of go forward with those new changes. So incremental change over time, and really thinking about your group of people as a body of people who you want to go on the journey with you, and being very strategic in that approach.
Casey used a key word here, hybrid. Sort of brought me back to a big question, which is, theoretically, on paper, when we're looking at new programs or new capabilities, shifting security all the way to the left is very easy. Like, hey, conversation one, let's talk about how this is going to impact security. Let's talk about legacy architecture, things that are already in the field, capabilities that are already out there. with this existing architecture, enterprise IT, non-traditional systems on the network, how can we effectively incorporate security into that architecture with varying risk postures and all the other things that go into it?
Yeah, I like to think of it as a more real-world situation, a partnership between enterprise and tactical. So currently we have things on the tactical edge from an enterprise service capability, but we still have enterprise services at the edge, shore and afloat. So, there's active collaboration today on offloading some of those responsibilities that are burdensome to the tactical mission, right? You don't want to just do your operations. You have to take on additional responsibilities like availability, resiliency, patching, compliance. And there's opportunities that come up to how can we be more collaborative. And I've actually seen stuff happening right now as we speak, and I've already been done in some cases, proofed out in a way that enterprise services providing resiliency for tactical users. And this hasn't happened across PEOs very well. And this is now increasing our abilities to be more secure in a resilient manner. Now, when you deliver those components, imagine being a warfighter that can just focus on their warfighting, right? Imagine something separate than Sailor to upload files in a more timely manner to do your installs or your patches to get an ISO file. These are all things that we've taken alternative approaches to and actually seen an easy 10x on operational use and availability. And still maintaining that infrastructure security. A lot of the legacy systems and a lot of more modern approaches are more software defined. So how do you incorporate that collaboration? Also make available a modern approach to divest from things that are duplicative, divest from things that are so legacy they're no longer providing value, and insert yourself in a system engineering approach to reduce your attack surface. And this is very important for us. We want to reduce our attack surface, be more common and collaborative. There's a lot of visions out there that take us from like a software stack of like 1,000 to 50. And the intent there is to drive us to a point where we have a playing ground we can actually manage from an adversarial perspective. The message, the intelligence, the cybersecurity operations centers, to orchestrate and understand if there's a false positive alert to address becomes a hold-up question. Let's first investigate because of these problems. So if we can have a single pane of glass from a system engineering approach, or if we can have an operational common operational picture that's real in real time, then we can actually maybe respond faster. A capability that gets us closest to real time versus near real time.
So I prefaced the conversation on the news that came out where China has released this AI that if you haven't read about it, it'll be in all the cybersecurity, IT type news. But we always have this emerging threat landscape. It's changing rapidly. Our adversaries are very capable. And I'm a cybersecurity professional. I've been accused many times of being in the way, just kind of saying no to everything. But it's very important that we strike a balance between developing new capability, fielding new capability, and doing it in a resilient, secure manner. Can you guys speak to that balance and how to effectively strike that balance?
Speaking of that from a software engineering perspective, because I mostly write code. Before working in the field, working with the company I am with now, us software engineers, most of us, you should just write code, and we wouldn't care, we just leave it up to the sysadmin to figure it out. And now, being in a more secure environment, there are a lot of things that we have to take into perspective. That being the business objective of our client. Our clients are primarily insurance agencies, insurance companies. So of course we have to ensure everything is still convenient to the clients, but it has to be secure, and we have to communicate that effectively with the clients. So as we're developing software, My approach, it took me a while to figure out, don't just write code and throw it out there, throw it in the pipeline, and the DevSecOps engineers, whoever, they'll figure it out. We had to start thinking from the perspective of business objective, security, and then kind of meeting that in the middle and continuously testing and ensuring that whatever products we're developing or delivering, it is being delivered not only to meet the needs of the client, but also in a very secure from a very secure perspective. In a nutshell, instead of saying no all the time, there are conversations that we have. So the conversations will be, why is it that you need this? And so it kind of escalates to the point where the clients kind of go, I think you're right. And so that kind of leads to our code being developed more secure, more robust, and sustainable over time versus, the next revision might be a new version of what we're, not a new version, but a new look and feel, and it throws off the entire, it just throws off the business for our clients. And so that is the perspective that I kind of look at things at, from being the developer who never cared to now the developer who has to think about all aspects before saying no or before saying yes.
Okay. So I want to bring up the agile approach. At least in the Dawn, we're doing agile release trains. A series of Scrum teams, arts, focused on different competencies, identity access management, a data analytic fabric, essentially, with a data analytics and visualization. These types of approaches are geared towards stakeholder collaborations and system engineers' commitment and involvement at a true MVP approach, right? So a lot of the system engineering strategies are boiled the ocean in some cases. In this feature development of epics and features and backlog grooming, and us all driving in the same seats in the same car on this agile release train together, is going to be a more accelerated approach to deliver faster and more securely, because we start looking at the ties between how they're not separate arts. They're interconnected. So an identity access management would ride within a data analytic fabric, right? The governance and orchestration and access control plane for data at the data layer will be that discussion. But the system engineering and the architecture would all be seamlessly connected. And we have these orchestrations between sprint planning and PIs, like she's mentioned before, to actually gear expectations and a commitment that ties portfolios, program offices, to transition those features and capabilities to sustainment. And actually takes, if you can show the metrics, we call them WAMs, essentially return on investments, you can actually tie that to a program or portfolio that would sustain that. It's almost easier to say authoritatively, you're going to have to now tell us the reason why you can't transition to this new capability, or why you can't leverage it and integrate it into your legacy system, or why you can't adopt it. Because we're trying to get moving. We're trying to get moving fast. We can't just do engineering systems approaches just to do them. We got to get outcomes. And outcome-driven metrics really drive an agile outcome of measuring success for us to get over to Pinnacle 27, kick out the adversary in our backyard, provide resiliency in our networks, migrate legacy systems, get rid of stuff, cattle drive stuff to things that are not useful anymore, remove duplicative things like I mentioned, and such. If you want to add.
I'll piggyback on that. As we mentioned before, strategic team building. As you're building out individual Scrum teams, making sure you have representation of each skill set required when building out those teams, so you have the right people in the right car together. And two really important tools, talking about scaled agile or an agile approach, are two tools that are really great to make sure everybody's on the same page and to kind of demonstrate the importance and need for this new approach is road mapping sessions. Getting the whole org together, all the leadership, putting all of those objectives on the the board and talking about, prioritizing them. What does that mean? How can we reduce efforts? Are we doing redundancies here? Can we team up over here? Throwing all of the spaghetti on the wall and then grouping it and coming up with a major picture helps reduce wasted efforts, or gets everybody kind of going in that same direction. And the second tool that's super important is objectives. You mentioned business objectives. Cannot emphasize that enough. Having really good quality business objectives that have measurements. They have stakeholder buy-ins. They are very detailed. Instead of some vague thing, they're really specific about the objective that they're driving to. So they don't just drive to San Diego, they drive to San Diego's Convention Center, Exhibit Hall C, sitting on the competitive edge stage, getting you to the right location rather than just showing up to the general vicinity.
So I suspect the audience, one, at an event like this, but certainly our audience here, something of the choir we're preaching to, because I feel like most of the stuff is obvious at this point. Collectively as a community, we understand these security principles. These approaches make a ton of sense. It seems obvious on its face. Hindsight is 20/20, of course. But these are not without their challenges. And I know adopting and implementing these things, as we mentioned in legacy architecture, or broadly, there are challenges. What are some of those challenges? And then, maybe more importantly, what are the means to overcome those challenges?
I'll start with, and we kind of mentioned this in the beginning about the cultural resistance piece. You have an established team. This isn't how they've been doing things, and you want to get them going that direction. Looking at training, education is a very powerful tool. Looking at your company structure, and we've got both government and other contracting companies in the room. If you have the power, look at your people, do a capabilities matrix of their skills. What are they missing? Because if someone doesn't understand something, that creates an insecurity, and they're less likely to get in the car with you. So making sure that you're heading off that cultural resistance by giving everybody the information and the opportunity to obtain the information, so they're well informed. And then I keep talking about it, but the stakeholders, getting them involved. For me, really another great tool is risks, right? So if you have a risk, someone has to own it, someone's going to accept it and mitigate it. Mm-hmm. So those are usually your government stakeholders. And so if you're talking to them and saying, hey, we can either do this really nicely architected, planned engineering feat here, or you could own the risk of a system vulnerability. What would you like, right? So it's really taking it and breaking it down and getting both your team on the same page and understanding of what they need to know to do the job, but also getting with the customer and really making sure they understand the impact of their yes or no's when agreeing to risks and objectives.
I want to add to this. So, a lot of the cultural shifts between, I'm sure some of you have heard this from a sustainment approach, is rob Peter to pay Paul. Where's my sustainment funding coming from? And a lot of the, where's my requirement statements? Where's the NDA requirement for me to do this? When you take an interpretation from an acquisition community strategy, they're taking a swag at those requirements from an operational perspective and committing them, right? Doesn't mean technology hasn't evolved or changed. It doesn't mean 5 years from now your strategy's an obsolescent one. And this has been probably the hardest discussion of how do I get out of the valley of death with my great model-based or systems engineering approach solution. I've really captured a modern approach, and we've turned it around to, if you can show the metrics, the return on investment, we can drive responsibilities to those acquisition communities to take it on. And so, at least in the Dawn side, we're driving this from an approach to say, it's not a what you can or can't do. It's what's your justification of why you can't do it. And we're actually having real conversations, unfortunately, about robbing Peter to pay Paul in some cases, because not everything comes with a cattle drive or an approach to cost savings. I no longer need to have a syslog server, or I no longer need to have this database. Unfortunately, the optimization in the user experience is enough to commit it. System engineering says you're still going to have these other tools and solutions. Acquisition says that's not helpful, right? So culturally, there's a rub. There's a rub between I only have so much money, resources to do engineering work. You're either going to ask me to do more with less, or are you going to take money from someone else for me to do my job? This has been a constant conversation and almost a competition for a lot of solutions to say who's got the best metric, return on investment wise, and still putting security first. We actually put out memos from the Navy side to say quantum resistance is something we're going to take more of an approach at. The security first approach is going to be availability, not you're just making something available. So when you do API gateways or API solutions, federated queries, security has to come in mind. Federated queries implies like you have a trust relationship on that database. So the idea of compromising and partnering with a lot of vendors and solutions, you really got to be mindful of what does decentralized look like? What does distributed ledgers look like? How can you incorporate them?
Robert, when we talked about this topic, you left me with a quote that I took a note on that I wanted to bring up, which is that selling it to the stakeholders is always the challenge, right? And that's that question: why is this different? Can you speak to that?
Yes. So I've had my share of probably not from the Navy perspective, from a military perspective, but I've been in higher education, no insurance, and I was in the Navy also. So there are times where working out at Balboa, the CMO would say to me, "Hey, we need to do this," and I'm like, "No, we're gonna do this. Here's why we're gonna do it." And this is me as an E5 explaining to an O6 why. Like I'm selling it to him. Like this is the approach we're taking, sir. It's still very secure. We're still securing the data. There's no form of leak. There's no leak that will occur. It will be more efficient for all parties, not only at Balboa, but also up over in Milton, over in DC. Everybody will be able to see our data. Those who need to see it, and they will see it on time. And so that is the biggest challenge, is selling it to the stakeholder, because if the stakeholder, being the person paying the bills, if they aren't sold on the who, what, where, when, why, and the as JV and Casey have been saying, the numbers and the metrics, if those don't come together and give them that picture of, okay, I'll spend, then we're going nowhere. And kind of tunneling back down to the ground level, the folks on the ground, the engineers, the software developers, the data engineers, if they aren't sold on it either, then you're wasting your time. So it has to be sold from stakeholders all the way down to the ground level in order for it to be successful. If not, we're gonna have a leak, we're gonna have a breach, and we're gonna have we're gonna have a problem down the line that will develop into something not pretty.
I'm going to add to that. This is another setting the stage topic, right? You all are talking about very important requirements and sharing with the stakeholders and getting everyone's buy-in. But to set the stage and create that environment, a non-technical requirement is psychological safety. And one of the things that is imperative to have a successful agile software development team is having a psychologically safe environment where people are comfortable to say, hey, I don't understand, or I don't know, or what about this? Because if people are too afraid to bring up an idea, you're missing out. If they're too afraid to ask a question, they're missing out. So really making it the environment and setting that up as a PM, having, we've got a Scrum Master there, we've got our other stakeholders kind of setting up the environment to be psychologically safe. Amy Edmondson is an awesome author. She's got great books on psychological safety, teaming for innovation, and some other books by her. Look her up. But it's really important to set that stage so we can permeate the minds of the stakeholders and the people that do need to have the buy-in.
I think it's a great perspective that communication is a big key in all of this, and understanding that there are stakeholders, there are people involved, they have their own needs that need to be met. Can you guys speak to communication specifically and how to communicate these needs and maybe discharge with some of the challenges like, hey, security slows us down. How do we communicate our way out of that?
So at least on the enterprise service side and some of the agile release trains, they've taken advantage of like Azure Teams channels, Scrum Teams, Scrum of Scrums, where the voice of the system engineers actually have a community of interest. And so in that community of interest, you have a champion. And actually, from a product owner perspective, can be that voice on a lean portfolio management team to say, hey, look, I've taken all the inputs and from a community of players external to our organization across different organizations and taken the community input to say, we need to reassess, reevaluate the scenario. Like we need to pause or we need to hurry up and get after these things versus the others. Keeping it agile, we don't want to, some of these concepts have turned into waterfall approaches. We wait till the end of a period to have a conversation. But when you have a champion of a community of interest that can be that squeaky wheel for you, we found it useful. We found it very much useful to be that translator to go and say, hey, look, we need some air cover. We need some leadership support. This isn't going to happen the way we thought we would or as easily as we could. So now what we need is this to be elevated, escalated. And we found top coverage support that way. We found discussions about other partnerships and collaborations saying that we don't have enough people is a common engineering problem. We don't have enough financial funds to pay and commit. Too many things are above the line to prioritize. And so when you start going, I can't tell them to do it. We need another boss to tell them what to do. We get support from the senior leadership to do that. And then you get back on track. So sometimes you have to slow down to go fast. It happens. But the community practice, the evangelist or a champion to speak on behalf of the engineers, it really does help to be able to say, hey, look, you mentioned the software developer or engineer that is down with what he's doing, can't have a voice or be heard. Well, we think we do. We have a way to get there.
Another great tool, capacity, right? Capacity is a really good way to illustrate that. And you can only do so much. And to communicate your team's ability to create or get a certain amount of work done to stakeholders is super important. That is showing them, communicating, this is what we can do. And if you get a surge middle of the PI, hey, I just got these 5 CDs full of these files that really are super important to the special operator, we need to get them in. Fabulous. Okay, as a PM, as a Scrum Master, you have those conversations early and often about what is going to fall off, because you can truly only do so much, right? We want to surge, we can cover down, get a few more things done, but really looking at what the capacity of the team is, how much they can commit to, and then having those hard conversations of absolutely we want to do this, it's super important. What are we not doing? Those are tough conversations, but yeah.
So, JV, you hit on something that I think collaboration, kind of a big key in all this, right, at the personal level, but let's talk sector level, like cross-sector, cross types of organizations. How do you see collaboration being used or is it important?
So I've done this many times in terms of transitioning pilots from a horizon perspective, other people's money, our own money, transitioning those over to Horizon 1 is a pathway, which transitions to telling the portfolios or acquisition communities, what's your roadmap to sustain this? But we found value in understanding that the operators and warfighters have a multi-organizational dependency. I mentioned this, I'll mention some other ones. So there's, for example, let's say a Air Force effort that goes after fielding blockchain on 250 sites, but they don't have the ML AI tools and capabilities to leverage. We found by virtue of other contracts and piloting efforts to demonstrate enterprise services connections between Advana, Jupiter, with Air Force operations command and control systems or other fielded effort sites, we've been able to demonstrate an orchestration of how this could work. to a system engineer, their ideas are, well, how is this going to be sustainable, right? We look at it as in terms of we write that boundary, that ATO boundary, we demonstrate within that scope, and then we start saying, which workloads do you own, Air Force? Which workloads do I own to sustain? And then we work on what's the fastest path between the two organizations to accredit that. Is it reciprocity if you have an ATO already? Is it we'll run our pipeline, you'll be able to leverage the outcome of that service? But what we've demonstrated is the cross-organization collaboration of services, not just organizations within one service, value and resiliency in terms of security. Because they're going to also think of their own platform, their own services, their own backlog, their own security center. And unfortunately, it's just not enough if we don't do something common and collaborative. So I'm a huge advocate between the services to build something together versus the DoD wants to do a lot of things with OUSD on the joint side to solve the joint mission stuff. But there's more than just that from a tactical perspective. I'll put it that way.
So one of the other things I wanted to ask the panel about, as you know, you guys are out in the field, either pushing these principles, making these changes, leading these programs that are developing these changes. Where are you finding gaps? Like what sort of gaps are emerging? Are there security gaps or program gaps? What are the trends you're seeing as you try to do these things?
The biggest gaps that I'm seeing are the idea of security compliance. The idea that it's your operational needs are a difference between organizations of a series of patches. I really am a huge advocate of the continuous ATO process. We have a cyber ready approach, and I've noticed that the cultural shift between cyber ready, which was initially geared towards patching and compliance, was driving towards continuous ATO processes for resilient networks, resilient security, resilient at the edge or disconnected or afloat. And so to be able to get there, we struggled with the idea of, okay, so how do we do it in a way that's shareable? Because even between services, we want to do our own thing. We want to do our own way of doing business. And it's a political game at that point. But the best thing we can do is show people how it can be done. We rely on a lot of iterations and strategies of piloting and demonstration on our fronts to get that out there. And we really want to do a better job at showcasing that so that people can start seeing the art of the possibility.
I would say policy versus practice and implementation. People want to talk about policy and they want to talk about security, but finding the hands-on and the talent to actually implement those actions that need to happen is a gap that I know we're working to fill, and we've done a really good job on my current team filling it. But when I look around, I do see there's a gap there. And then also looking at, as we mentioned earlier, looking at security as an impediment versus a strategic enabler, right? We can't do things we need to do if we don't have these security practices in place. So doing a mind shift and kind of looking at it a little bit differently. It's happening, but it's a slow movement.
For me, I would say I'd jump on the piggyback off what they're saying. Compliance is a big issue that I'm seeing. Yes, things are changing continuously. Even, for example, the CMMC just recently got changed. You know, so there's a lot of changes that come about, and it's just kind of the timely manner of having things done, and along with that change, having the I wouldn't say the ground level folks, engineers and so on, having them kind of have that mindset shift, and kind of speaking to what Casey was saying also is giving this kind of having the freedom to say, hey, I don't understand what's going on here, you know, or this is not quite clear. Could you break this down to me? So I think a lot of people are or have been adapting the fake it till I make it thing, and that's I see that as a risk also. If you don't understand, just say you don't understand, and let's figure it out together as a team, you know.
So we're nearing the end of our time. I want to leave a little bit here for questions, but I do want from the panel, you have an audience who has, you know, an interest in implementing these types of principles in their programs and their systems. what parting thoughts do you have for them that might help enable their success from here?
I just want to mention what the DoD CIO was really driving towards yesterday, if you were there, about some LOEs. And it really actually kicks on some of this. There was joint, modernize the cloud, align the bureaucratic process, exercise and execute, decide. One of the major security ones that she focused on was the right user at the right time. The right security equals zero trust in the cloud. A lot of things were discussed like RBAC, ABAC, security edge cloud discussions, and federation of identity. These are if we're going to try to move into more of those approach and look at the OSI model and get down to access and control at the data layer from a leadership perspective, then we need to start aligning our strategies to be ready for that. As long as we all understand each other's mission, where we're trying to head, then maybe we can have engineering practices focus on where we were trying to go.
I would say security is the golden thread that enables things to happen, and it should be woven through everything you do within your agile development teams, within your stakeholder management, within the entire safe architecture, if you will, and to really kind of step back and kind of zoom out and not just look at the technical definition of it, but look at what is your program manager doing? What are your scrum masters doing? What conditions are being set to create an environment where this can actually happen?
For me, I definitely would be harping on the fact that your basics and your foundations will always be where we kind of have to roll back to. So I think a lot of what's happening today is we're thinking too much about what tech can do this and what tech can do that and all of that versus, all right, let's kind of take a couple steps back and what's the basics, what's the foundation, what's hardening, what's zero trust, so on and so forth. Understand the foundations, and then from there, use that again, like your foundation, and work your way back up to the top, and then you can think about, okay, training, tech, what tech needs to be adopted, and so on and so forth. In addition to ensuring that you kind of hone into and understand your the stakeholders' objectives, along with the business objectives.
Audience, do we have any questions from you all? Microphone's up there if anyone's interested. All right, well, thank you all for coming. Please thank our panelists, Dr. Robert Morgan, Dr. Casey Cleaver, and Jonathan Villalobos.
Okay, just a quick reminder, if you're interested in continuing education maintenance, be sure to scan your badge before you leave. I'd like to thank Andy for moderating today's panel. Thank you to our panelists once again for a very insightful discussion, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the show, and thank you for your time today.